"Get that pill away from her, Frank." The voice echoed through Carnegie Hall's backstage corridors at 7:47 p.m. on April 23, 1961, just 13 minutes before what would become the most legendary comeback performance in American entertainment history. But the 3,165 people settling into their seats had no idea that Judy Garland was unconscious in her dressing room, and Frank Sinatra was making a decision that would either save her career or destroy them both forever. Are you ready to discover the untold truth that Hollywood buried for 60 years? Hit that like button if you want to know what really happened backstage that night, and let me know in the comments, did Frank make the right choice? The pills had been Judy's constant companions for over a decade by then. Benzedrine to stay awake for 16-hour filming days, Seconal to come down from the highs, and a cocktail of everything in between to manage what the studio doctors called professional maintenance. At 48 years old, Judy Garland wasn't just fighting for a comeback, she was fighting for her life, and the person closest to saving her was the one man in Hollywood who understood the price of perfection. Frank had gotten the call 3 hours earlier from Judy's manager demanding he get to Carnegie Hall immediately. "She's in no condition to perform, Frank. We need to cancel the show." But Frank knew what canceling would mean. After the disasters at the Palace Theater and her MGM firing, another failed comeback would finish Judy Garland for good. The woman who had sung Over the Rainbow would disappear forever, remembered only as another Hollywood casualty who couldn't handle the pressure. When Frank burst through her dressing room door, he found Judy slumped in her chair, her famous ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, which she'd worn for luck, scattered on the floor beside 3 empty pill bottles. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak, and her makeup artist was frantically trying to wake her up with cold towels and black coffee. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn that no one saw coming. How many did she take? Frank's voice was ice cold as he knelt beside Judy's chair, checking her pupils and feeling for her pulse like he'd learned during his brief medical training in the Army. "I don't know, Mr. Sinatra. I found her like this 20 minutes ago. She keeps mumbling something about not being good enough and letting everyone down again." Frank had seen this before. The combination of Seconal and whatever cocktail Judy was using to manage her stage fright could kill her if they didn't act fast. But calling an ambulance would mean canceling the show, and Frank knew that canceling would destroy what might be Judy's last chance at redemption. The entertainment press was already circling like vultures, waiting for her to fail so they could write her obituary. "Get me a pot of the strongest coffee you can find, and I need towels soaked in ice water," Frank ordered, rolling up his sleeves. "And clear everyone out of here except you and me." For the next 8 minutes, Frank Sinatra, the man who commanded respect from everyone from mob bosses to presidents, worked like a paramedic to save Judy Garland's life. He forced coffee down her throat, slapped her face with ice-cold towels, and walked her around the small dressing room until her eyes began to focus and her speech became coherent. "Frank," Judy's voice was barely a whisper, "did I miss my entrance?" "Not yet, sweetheart, but you're about to give the performance of your life." What happened next changed everything, and I guarantee you've never heard this part of the story before. Frank made a decision that violated everything he knew about show business protocol. Instead of letting Judy go on stage alone in her fragile condition, he decided to stay backstage throughout her entire 90-minute performance, monitoring her condition and ready to intervene if she showed signs of collapse. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Frank had secretly arranged for Dr. Milton Blackstone, one of New York's most discreet physicians, to be stationed in the wings with medical equipment including oxygen and stimulants in case Judy's condition deteriorated during the show. The audience never knew that between the trolley song and Come Rain or Come Shine, Judy was receiving medical attention behind the curtain. The performance that night became legendary not just because of Judy's incredible vocal ability but because of Frank's invisible support system. Every time Judy walked off stage for a costume change, Frank was there with water, encouragement, and medical monitoring. When she stumbled during stormy weather, it wasn't from emotion, it was from the medication still affecting her balance, and Frank was ready to catch her if she fell. But the real drama was happening in the audience, and it's something that could have destroyed both their careers. Seated in row H, seat 12, was Hedda Hopper, Hollywood's most vicious gossip columnist, armed with opera glasses and a notepad. She'd come specifically to document Judy's failure, planning to write a career-ending piece about the former star's decline. But what Hopper didn't know was that Frank had spotted her during the first act and made his own contingency plan. During intermission, while Judy was receiving oxygen backstage, Frank walked into the audience and had a very quiet, very persuasive conversation with Miss Hopper. No one ever found out exactly what Frank said to the columnist, but her review the next day described Judy's performance as a triumphant return to form and made no mention of any health concerns or backstage drama. Years later, when Hopper was on her deathbed, she confessed to her assistant that Frank Sinatra had made her an offer that night at Carnegie Hall that was too dangerous to refuse. "He didn't threaten me," she whispered. "He just explained very politely what would happen to my career if I wrote anything that hurt Judy." Frank Sinatra's explanations were always very convincing. The performance became a triumph, but the real story was what Frank sacrificed to make it happen. What the public never knew was that Frank was supposed to be recording his album Ring-a-Ding-Ding that same night at Capitol Studios in Los Angeles. Canceling that session to stay with Judy cost him over $200,000 in studio time and delayed the album release by 3 months. But Frank never mentioned the financial loss to Judy, and she never knew the price he'd paid to save her career. The Carnegie Hall performance revitalized Judy's career and led directly to her contract with Capitol Records, where she would record some of her most memorable work. But for Frank, it marked the beginning of a different kind of relationship with his fellow performers. Word spread quietly through Hollywood that Frank Sinatra would risk everything to protect a friend in trouble, and that loyalty became the foundation of the legendary bonds he formed with other entertainers. But there's one more secret about that night that didn't come out until decades later. In 1998, when Carnegie Hall was renovated, workers found a small metal box hidden behind a loose brick in Judy's dressing room. Inside was a handwritten note from Judy to Frank, dated April 23, 1961. "Francis, if I don't make it through tonight, please tell everyone I tried my best. You saved my life more times than you know. The pills aren't stronger than friendship, Dorothy." The note was never given to Frank because Judy had hidden it during intermission, planning to retrieve it after the show if she survived the performance. She forgot about it in the excitement of her triumph, and it remained hidden for 37 years as a testament to their friendship and Frank's quiet heroism. Frank kept that note in his wallet until the day he died, and according to Nancy Sinatra, he would read it whenever he needed to remember why loyalty mattered more than money in show business. "Dad always said that saving Judy that night wasn't about the performance," Nancy recalled in a 2003 interview. "It was about proving that in a business full of sharks, somebody still cared whether you lived or died." The legacy of that night extended far beyond just one performance. The Carnegie Hall concert established a template that Frank would use for the rest of his career when dealing with troubled performers. Was struggling with alcohol, when Dean Martin was grieving his son's death, when Peter Lawford was battling his own demons. Frank applied the same combination of tough love and practical support that had saved Judy Garland. Entertainment historians now recognize that April 23, 1961 marked a turning point not just for Judy's career but for how performers looked out for each other in Hollywood. The Rat Pack loyalty that became legendary had its roots in that Carnegie Hall dressing room where Frank learned that true friendship meant being willing to risk everything for someone else's dreams. But perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is how completely it was kept secret. In an era when Hollywood gossip dominated the headlines and every scandal was front-page news, Frank managed to coordinate a complex backstage medical intervention, negotiate with powerful columnists, sacrifice his own recording schedule, and save a friend's career without a single leak to the press. The only people who knew the full truth were Frank, Judy, Dr. Blackstone, and Judy's makeup artist, who signed a confidentiality agreement that lasted until her death in 1989. Even Judy's own family didn't learn about Frank's intervention until after both stars had passed away. And here's the most incredible part that proves just how deep their friendship really was. 3 months after the Carnegie Hall triumph, Judy was offered a lucrative television deal that would have made her one of the highest-paid performers in the medium. But the contract contained a clause requiring her to publicly discuss her past struggles with medication as part of the show's promotional campaign. The network executives thought her comeback story would drive ratings through the roof. Judy was torn between the financial security the deal offered and her desire to keep her private struggles private. She called Frank for advice, expecting him to encourage her to take the money and run. Instead, Frank offered her something no one else in Hollywood would have considered. "If you don't want to do the TV thing, I'll give you a recording contract with my label," Frank told her. "Same money, but you sing what you want to sing and your personal life stays personal. Nobody gets to make a circus out of your pain just to sell soap commercials." Frank's offer wasn't just generous, it was revolutionary. At a time when performers had little control over their public image, Frank was essentially offering Judy complete artistic freedom plus financial security, with no strings attached except one: she had to promise to stay clean and accept help when she needed it. Judy accepted Frank's offer, and the resulting album Judy Garland and Friends became one of her most critically acclaimed works. But more importantly, it established a precedent that Frank would maintain throughout his career, using his power and influence to protect performers who couldn't protect themselves. But the story gets even more remarkable when you learn what Frank did next. Emboldened by his success with Judy, Frank began quietly implementing what he called his safety net program for troubled performers. He would identify entertainers who were struggling with personal problems or career difficulties and offer them recording contracts, concert bookings, or financial support with no publicity and minimal expectations. For Dean Martin's comeback after his son's death was financed by Frank's safety net. So was Sammy Davis Jr.'s recovery from his car accident and eye injury. Even Marilyn Monroe received Frank's help during her darkest periods, though their relationship was complicated by other factors. The entertainment industry had never seen anything like it. Frank Sinatra, known for his tough business practices and demanding professional standards, was operating a private charitable foundation for fellow performers, funded entirely out of his own pocket and managed with the kind of discretion usually reserved for state secrets. Industry insiders began calling it the Sinatra Standard. The idea that successful performers had an obligation to help their less fortunate colleagues, not just with lip service or token donations, but with real practical support that could change lives and save careers. And then Judy did something that shocked even Frank. In 1965, 4 years after Carnegie Hall and 2 years into her recording contract with Frank's label, Judy came to Frank with an unusual request. She wanted to establish her own safety net program for young female performers who were being exploited by the studio system. "Francis," she said, using the nickname that only his closest friends were allowed to use, "you saved my life and now I want to save some others. But I need your help to do it right." Together, Frank and Judy created the Rainbow Foundation, named after Judy's signature song, which provided financial assistance, career guidance, and personal support to young women entering the entertainment industry. The foundation operated in complete secrecy, with recipients never knowing who their benefactors were. The Rainbow Foundation helped launch the careers of dozens of performers who went on to become major stars, though most of them never learned about Frank and Judy's involvement until years later. The foundation also provided support for performers who were struggling with addiction, abusive relationships, or career setbacks. For Frank, the foundation represented something he'd never experienced before: the satisfaction of using his power for purely altruistic purposes, with no expectation of publicity or return on investment. It was, according to those who knew him best, the achievement he was most proud of, though he never spoke about it publicly. The final chapter of this incredible friendship came in a way no one expected. On June 22, 1969, just hours before Judy Garland's death in London, she made one final phone call to Frank in Los Angeles. The call lasted 7 minutes, and Frank never told anyone what Judy said during those final moments. But according to Nancy Sinatra, Frank's behavior changed dramatically after receiving that call. Dad was never the same after Judy died, Nancy recalled. He became more protective of his friends, more generous with struggling performers, and more determined to use his influence to help people instead of just helping himself. Whatever Judy said to him that night, it affected him for the rest of his life. Frank attended Judy's funeral in New York, but he didn't speak at the service or seek any publicity from his presence. Instead, he quietly paid for the funeral expenses and established a trust fund for Judy's children, ensuring their education and financial security. The trust was managed anonymously for over 30 years, with the children never knowing their benefactor until after Frank's death. In his will, Frank left instructions for the Rainbow Foundation to continue operating even after his death, funded by a substantial portion of his estate. The foundation still exists today, though it operates under a different name and continues to provide assistance to entertainers in need. And that's the complete untold story of how Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland's friendship changed Hollywood forever. The Carnegie Hall incident that started it all lasted only 13 minutes, but its impact resonated through the entertainment industry for decades. It established a new model for how successful performers could use their influence to help others, and it proved that in a business built on competition and ego, genuine friendship and mutual support were not only possible but incredibly powerful. Frank's intervention that April night in 1961 didn't just save one performance or one career, it saved a legend and created a legacy of compassion that outlived both stars. Every time a successful performer helps a struggling colleague, every time the entertainment industry comes together to support one of its own, they're following the template that Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland created in a Carnegie Hall dressing room 63 years ago. The ruby slippers Judy wore that night are now in the Smithsonian, representing the magic of the Wizard of Oz. But for those who know the real story, they represent something even more magical: the power of friendship to work miracles when everything else fails. And that's why Frank Sinatra's 13 minutes backstage at Carnegie Hall might be the most important performance of his career, even though he never sang a single note.